Needless to say, I'm really excited to talk to you. I wholeheartedly believe in your message about fostering amazing cultures, positive cultures to take companies through hard times and come out on top. As a recent founder and leader of my own life science sales agency, obviously your message speaks right here to the heart. So I got a lot of questions for you.
Cool.
We'll get through those. The reason why I started this podcast is to understand the different pathways people take to end up within the biotech life science industry. I had a chance to take a look at your profile on LinkedIn, and you did a bachelor's degree at King's College in English language and literature. So on paper, that's probably the farthest thing from what you're doing now. So you've got to have a really interesting story.
Yeah, it's a good observation. It is a long way away from where we are today. And actually, I ended up in this sector completely by accident, but have been doing it now for 20 years. And I did spend a couple of years in a different sector. I spent a couple of years in oil and gas and didn't like it as much. So I'm on my way back. But yeah, English language and literature degree. I got to be honest, I was a pretty lazy student. I chose English language and literature because, because I liked reading books and it seemed pretty easy. And
Makes sense.
I got to the end of university, and right now we have a big mission and purpose, and I really believe in it, and I'm really invested in it. Back then, it was a little bit more self-serving. I was sick of having no money, and wanted to find the job that would pay me the most money. And some of my friends that I played rugby at university, some of my friends who were a year older than me had gone into the recruitment industry. And they seem to be really enjoying it, but more importantly, they always seem to have loads of cash. And so I decided I was going to
That
explore
helps.
that. And I ended up completely by chance going to work for a company that was starting a life sciences division, a recruitment company. So they'd been an IT recruiter. They'd started to recruit SaaS programmers in banks and in retail and that kind of thing. And they'd started to have a few pharmaceutical clients, had realized it was different, had started a small team, and were starting to build that division. And I was the third person to join that team. We then, over the next 10 years, built that to 500 people in 16 countries, all in pharma, biotech, medical devices, diagnostics, those sorts of things. So completely by accident, but I couldn't imagine doing anything else now. I was really lucky with that first company. I was there for 10 years. I got the opportunity to go and start a business in New York for them. I started an executive search business that covered the whole of Europe. So we were recruiting sort of CEOs and people like that for small and mid-sized biotechs around Europe. And then worked for another company that was more boutique. And then I decided to start my business, Singular, 6 years ago, really because I felt while the work I was doing was valuable, we were only solving part of the problem. And I didn't really know what that sort of answer was at the time, although it's become clear over time. But where we've evolved to over the last 6 years is that our focus is entirely on how do you build really outstanding teams? How do you build brilliant cultures that really drive success? Because when we look at the most successful biotech companies, which is only a handful, right? It's not many that make it. They didn't necessarily have better science. They had good science, but they didn't necessarily have better science than the ones that failed. They didn't necessarily have more money at the start or face less challenges. They just found ways to navigate those challenges. And so the way that we try to sort of contribute to the success rate of the industry is by helping those companies to build teams that can navigate those challenges, that can drive their success.
I think that what you're doing is so crucial because, having been, I work for myself now, but having worked for big life science companies, I was always fascinated, and having been in sales leadership roles, fascinated about this around how to build an amazing team, how to foster that culture. And it always amazed me how there was so much focus, and working for a public company, there was so much focus on the
Yeah.
numbers and targets and how do we get there. But there was never any talk about, hey, how's our culture doing? Like, how is your team doing? Who needs help in team spirit? Or there's never any discussions around that. And I always tell myself, like, even if we focus like 25% of the time talking about that, we'd be way, way ahead than just focusing on the numbers and the metrics,
It's the biggest lever you can pull. Because even if your strategy is perfect and your product's great and your marketing's fantastic, if you've not got the people to actually go to market, deliver the product, whatever it is that those people do, and they're not working in the right way, working effectively together, everything's going to be more difficult. The metrics are trickier, so it gets ignored more.
The intangibles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's this interesting
Yeah.
concept that it was kind of a realization that I had as a leader maybe a couple of years ago. I don't know where I picked it up from. It's probably like a combination of a few things I'd read or heard or whatever. But most teams, most people, most companies spend their time focusing on the results. They put in heroic efforts and individual efforts to drive the results. But the very best organizations, and it's not always businesses, they create an environment that creates the result without necessarily having to have that individual effort. Although individual effort is always part of it, the environment, the system creates the result. And
Yeah.
that's a much more difficult thing to do. But if you can do it, it's way more sustainable, it's way more scalable, it's way less intensive and dependent on individuals. And I think that's always been kind of my thought on it is how do you create that system and that environment that delivers the result rather than just how do we get that result tactically?
Now, I always found this a challenge, and I don't know about you, but do you think there's always a balance between finding the right people with, the technical savvy to get the job done well, but also understand what it is to have a positive culture, team spirit, collaboration? Or do you think you can hit that 100% of the time? You could find the people that understands both, or is it always a balance? It's you'll never have the perfect team that has both those qualities,
Yeah.
but you just have to learn how to live with it.
Yeah. It's really hard to find perfect people. I think there's very few of them, right? For even in one of those aspects, finding the perfect fit to your culture or finding the perfect technical fit is difficult enough in itself. Put the two together and it becomes even harder. But I think life sciences companies, and there are exceptions, I'm generalizing here, they typically overweight the technical side of it. So they place more importance on the technical side of it, partly because the work they're doing is incredibly technical. And so it's easy to understand, but also the people, the leaders, the people who are doing the recruiting or the team building or the leading are often technical themselves. And so they value those skills and they value that background. My personal view is that, you should definitely hire people who have the skills that you need, but it's much more important to hire people who align with your culture and then align with the kind of organization you're trying to build. Because if you do, they can learn skills, but it's very, very hard to change people's beliefs, principles, values. And there's an argument to say that you shouldn't really try. It's not really your duty as a company to do that. Great teams will figure out ways to do things they don't know how to do, whereas mediocre teams, even if they know how to do things, will often drop the ball.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. So as a leader, though, having those two type of individuals on your team, how do you navigate through that? Do you just lean in hard with the people, the culture savvy people, and kind of let I was gonna say nerds, but you know what I mean?
I think they'd often self-describe as nerds or self-identify as nerds. No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
But it's important to recognize that people can be really on board with your culture and really on board with your values and really align with it, but express it in different ways. And so, yeah, there's the old stereotype, isn't there, that like software engineers don't really care about the people that they work with and they'd rather work on their own. I think that's a generalization. I don't think it's 100% true. But even then, you can account for all different kinds of characters. I think what it's about is understanding what are the real underlying values, principles, however you want to define them, that are important to you as an organization. And then assembling a group of people that all share those values or all share those principles. That's the key thing, because if everybody feels that it's really important to, for example, look for creative ways to do things, well, that's going to manifest in lots of different ways. But if everybody believes that, then they're going to respect the different ways that other people operate in, even if it has to be explained to them. And there's still some common ground there, even though you've built a really diverse workforce. Because The other mistake that I see companies making a lot is they try and focus on culture fit. What tends to happen is they hire people who are like the people that they already have, but there's never much interrogation or analysis of what does that actually mean, and so it ends up being less diverse and therefore less effective, less innovative. There's a ton of research that just shows diverse teams are better at problem solving, they're better at creativity and innovation, and they perform better. But hiring for culture fit kind of squashes that quite a bit. So you don't want to go too much to that extreme, but you want to define the values, define what's important, and really, really select for that, I think.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that's why it's so hard, right? And like you said earlier, there's only a handful of really successful
Yeah.
biotechs because it's hard to find that mix. And I think that the more you grow in people size, the harder it is,
Oh, yeah.
obviously.
Yeah, culture would be easy if it
Yeah.
wasn't for all the people. But it is, I mean,
Yeah.
the challenging thing about it is it's organic and it's dynamic, right? And it never sits still. It's not like creating a software program. It's not like creating an app where you create it and then, yes, there's going to be bugs, but you can work out the bugs and then you can get it working perfectly over time. Just by saying that, you can probably tell I'm not a software engineer, but you get the concept.
I can relate. Yeah.
But culture's not like that. You can consistently improve culture, but you never end up at a perfect place where everything just works without any effort because you bring new people in. Even if you don't bring new people in, the people that you have change and they move through different stages in their life and they react differently to different things. The goals of the company change. Biotech and life sciences companies go through these key transitions, right? Where they go from very R&D driven to clinical typically to commercially driven. And so the nature of the organizational change. So there's always, even when you're really good on culture, even when you get it right, it's always swinging to, it's like a pendulum. It's always swinging to one side or another. And every person, every situation that comes into it affects it. And so this is why I'm fascinated by it, is that it changes all the time. And so, yeah, you've got to constantly be deliberate about how is it changing, how is it evolving. You can allow culture to change and evolve, and you may end up somewhere you don't want to be, or you can accept it's going to change and evolve and be then deliberate about, okay, where are we going to take it?
I never thought of that. You can set a goal of having this is the culture we want. And what you're saying is that during the years, you may not always get there. It'll always swing based on the people you hire
Yeah.
and let go. But you're always striving for that culture, that ideal culture that you're looking for.
Yeah, you may get there temporarily and then
Yeah.
it changes or what have
Yeah.
you, or it may remain just out of reach, and that doesn't mean it's not worth pursuing, but it gives you that direction, right? And it's
Yeah.
I think the important thing though is that it's always got to serve what you're trying to achieve as an organization. This is another mistake that people make, is you'll get your sort of passionate HR people who they focus on culture for the sake of culture,
Yeah.
whereas actually it should be really in service of what you're trying to achieve. And then acknowledging that whatever you're trying to achieve, there are lots of different ways to do it. And so it's about, well, which way do we want to go about it? What kind of organization do we want to create in pursuit of that goal?
So from your experience now, how long you been doing Singular?
6 years. We started the company 6 years ago.
6 years. Awesome. Congrats. What is the percentage of companies that you interact with, the biotech companies, that actually get this?
It's a good question. By the time we work with a company, they usually kind of get it. They normally come to us because they've realized that this is important. Sometimes there's companies that are just starting out that the founders want to build a really great culture. They understand the importance of it. Maybe they've been part of a great culture or a bad culture and they want to do it right. And so they'll come to us at the beginning and they say, look, help us to establish the framework around this. Those are my favorite because there's nothing to get rid of at that point. The other ones are where there's been leadership changes and someone's come in and gone, wow, I'm not sure about this culture. I think we need to adjust it. Or something's gone wrong. Or something's not working in the way people like, or there's an issue to solve. So sometimes companies will come to us and they don't know quite what the issue is, or what the cause of it is, or what to do about it. And that's cool. We can help them diagnose that, and we can help them really get under the skin of it and understand where the cultural roots of problems are, because a lot of problems are cultural problems, at the core of them, even if they don't present as that on the surface of them. Even technical problems can actually trace back to cultural problems, although not all the time. Sometimes they are just technical problems. So by the time they come to us, there's an understanding of it. And we do a lot of content and things to sort of help people understand. But if you're asking what percentage of biotech and life sciences companies really do value culture, I couldn't give you a percentage, but it's not enough. I think there's an overweighted emphasis on the science, which I get. That's their background. But the money's so demanding as well, right? Raising the money, then managing the investors and thinking about the next round, thinking about the burn rate, all that kind of thing. And particularly at the moment, that's even more challenging than it ever has been. So I think those are the things that take people's attention. And culture's never urgent until it really, really is. And by then it's too late. So the problems you've got in the lab and the challenges you've got raising money, or the sort of the cash burning quicker than you expect, or the revenue not coming in, they're always going to be more pressing issues. But sitting there, culture can actually help you to solve those things if you take the time to do it. But it's hard to sometimes have the discipline to focus on it when those other fires are burning.
You mentioned earlier, I think you alluded to the fact that, some people it's harder to change. So when a company realizes, okay, something needs to change, we need to change our culture, we need to establish a culture, does it always come down to hard decisions of letting some people go because you know that it'll be hard to bring them on board to the new
Yeah.
culture, or
Not
is that
always.
always inevitable?
No, it's not inevitable. I think it often happens, but I think it can be a knee-jerk reaction to a problem without defining where you want to go. What I mean by that is there's an experiment. There's a really famous experiment called the Five Monkeys experiment. I wrote a blog about this recently, which is why it comes to mind. So this is supposedly, it's a bit, no one really knows if it actually happened, but it's a really good story. There are similar experiments that happened. So the story goes like this. So researchers put 5 monkeys in a cage. And in that cage, it was a big cage, but there was a ladder that led to a hatch in the ceiling that the monkeys could climb up and open. I don't know why they needed a ladder, they're monkeys, but apparently there was a ladder. And there was nothing to do in the cage.
They didn't have a tree.
Yeah, exactly. There was nothing to do in the cage. There was no food. It was boring.
Okay.
So after a while, obviously, the monkeys got restless and they realized that there was this ladder. They started to climb the ladder to try and get out. So whenever a monkey approached the ladder and started climbing it, something bad would happen to the other monkeys. They'd get sprayed with water, or they'd get loud noises played, or like there'd be electric shocks or whatever. In those inhumane experiments they ran in the 60s, it's kind of one of those scenarios. And so
Gotcha.
so the story goes that what happened is that gradually over time, every time a monkey approached the ladder, the other monkeys started attacking it to stop it from climbing the ladder so they didn't get the punishment. So when that was happening consistently, the researchers would start taking monkeys out of the cage and replacing them with new monkeys. And they removed the punishment, but the monkeys that had already been there carried on attacking any monkey that approached the ladder. And this experiment continued until there were none of the original monkeys left in the cage, but the behavior persisted. So none of the monkeys that were in there had any experience of the punishment happening, but they still persisted with the
Wow.
behavior. So that story is a bit apocryphal, as I say, but there's a lot of other studies that show similar behavior. But so the point of that is that changing the people won't necessarily change the culture unless you change all of the people and change the systems and change the framework. And that's such a heavy lift to do that it typically doesn't get done. So actually what you tend to find is that teams get replaced and the culture doesn't really change and the problems still persist because the environment shapes how people behave. Another example is I used to work for a company. The overall company was really good. There was one office that I worked in where the environment was shocking, and there's lots of reasons for it, but it was a really negative environment, a really political environment and all that kind of thing. We used to hire a lot of young people who were like straight out of university or straight out of high school, and we looked for people with real drive and ambition and energy and determination and things like that. And so we hired all these brilliant young kids, and then 6 months later, all of that was gone because the environment had kind of beat it out of them. So just changing the people doesn't change the culture. It's about being, and cultural change is difficult. Going back to your original question, recognizing that you need to change is key. Understanding what the change that you need to make is and what the state that you want to move towards is also crucial, obviously. But being really honest about where you are against that is the really hard part, because that can be really painful. And when you start to make cultural change, people will resist it and people will fight against it, because people don't like to change, even when they can see that what they're doing isn't serving them.
Yeah.
Again, there's a ton of research on this. And typically, when you make a big cultural shift, some of those people will opt out. And they'll leave, they'll go and get another job, whatever. Or they'll start to underperform, and then you've got to manage them out, or they'll misbehave in some way, and that happens. But no, it doesn't necessarily follow that you have to change the team, but you have to be really, really deliberate about how you want to change the environment. And I think you have to be willing to move on the people who don't want to go on that journey with you.
Does it come down to leadership?
Leadership's
Because,
yeah.
you know, in the monkey example, there must have been an alpha male that was controlling the group. And
Yeah.
if that alpha monkey was scared for the monkey to go up there, then everyone else would fall in line.
100%. So we have a framework that we use for culture, and there's 7 building blocks. And the top building block, which forms like the primary element of culture, once you've put everything else in place, is inspiring leadership. Because ultimately what culture is how people behave to each other. Culture it's kind of like, you know how I think it was Beethoven said, the music is not the notes, it's the space between the notes. Well, in some ways the culture isn't the people, it's the space between the people. But some people have more influence on that than others. And so you'll have elected leaders, so the leaders of the organization. You'll also have people who are not in leadership positions but are very influential. And those people will definitely have an outsized impact on the culture. Certainly cultural change comes down to effective leadership, because it's going to be hard and painful, and you've got to see it through, and you've got to keep connecting people to why you're doing it, and you've got to bring it into their terms, and you've got to support them through it, and all that kind of stuff that a great leader does. So yeah, leadership's a critical element.
That's probably the quickest way to turn around your culture or to get the culture you're looking for. Tom, why don't you tell me within, 2 minutes, what companies need to do to foster successful cultures?
In 2 minutes. Okay.
The elevator pitch.
Listen,
of what they need to do.
The short version is there's only 4 things. You've got to recruit the right people, engage them, develop them, and retain them. And the reality is there's only 3 things, because if you do the first 3, the 4th one will look after itself. Now, that's the very simple, high-level answer.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not quite as straightforward as that. But
There you go. You nailed it.
underneath those things, there are 7 building blocks to brilliant culture. So essentially what we did at Singular is we went and studied all of the most successful biotech companies, and a lot of the most successful companies out of the sector. And we looked at what are the things that they do, not what is their culture, but what are the things that they focus on to develop a really healthy culture. And there's 7 building blocks. So foundationally, you have mission, purpose, and vision. You've got to be really clear on where you're going, what you're trying to achieve, why you're doing it, what the future looks like. The second foundation is values and non-negotiables. So this is all about what kind of environment, what kind of organization are we building, and being really clear and specific about that, drilling it down into behaviors and competencies and making it real, embedding it in the company. On top of those 2 foundations, there's 4 pillars. If you think of like a Parthenon, this is how we tend to sort of display it. First is talent acquisition. So you've got to bring in the right people, right? That's maybe, along with leadership, the most important bit, because it makes everything else so much easier. The second pillar is alignment and performance management. So a lot of companies, especially smaller companies, really struggle with this. You've got to manage performance. You've got to align people. You've got to make sure that people are performing at a high level. Alongside that is people development. People want to learn, they want to grow. If you want to grow as an organization, you need people to become more capable over time. And also you're more likely to retain them if they're developing and growing. So that's the third pillar. And the fourth is the environment. We call it employee experience and continuous cultural improvements. That's everything from feedback to removing friction to communication, diversity, how people do hybrid working and remote working, like the environment that they live in, the behaviors that they see, the way they communicate, the way they interact. And then sitting over the top of all of it is inspiring leadership. So if you can focus on those 7 things and continually try to improve them, your culture will continually improve.
That is amazing, Tom. That is amazing. I'm going to definitely take that one home and implement that with my team. But hopefully what you just described there will help a lot of team leaders out there in the life science biotech space. It's even just like being conscious about it is the first step.
Yeah.
And is super helpful.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people are just not even thinking about it, right? They're just so focused on what their boss is telling them over their shoulder and their boss's shoulder. You know how it is these days. You're just so busy, bombarded with all kinds of things, all kinds of media, that it's hard to really just step back and say, hey, are we actually jiving or gelling together? Big lesson.
Yeah, even when they do start to think about it, it's difficult for people to know where to start or what specifically to do. And this is actually why we created this framework, because culture touches everything, and it can be subtle, it can be subconscious. So without having a sort of lens to view it through, it's really hard to see where to focus. So hopefully that's what that framework does, is it helps people to determine, actually, we've got an issue here, and then it'll start to help them focus in on actions they can take.
For sure. Before I let you go, where can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, so I do a lot on LinkedIn, so they can find me there. We have monthly events that we run, monthly workshops that we run, which will be advertised on there. So they're free. People can come along to that. We dive into that framework more. There's a content hub that's about to go live. It's not live yet, but it should be next week, and I'll share the details with you. But on there, there's going to be sort of training videos, ebooks, podcasts, all that kind of stuff. So if people want to learn more about culture and how to implement culture, challenges, frameworks, that kind of stuff, that'll all be there. Free content, free resources that they can access. So yeah, I'll get all the information over to you when it's all live, and you can share it.
Absolutely. Let me know, and I'll share with everybody for sure. Thank you so much, Tom. I really appreciate it. Wishing you the best of luck with your endeavor. It's definitely super important, and let's definitely keep in touch. I clicked on follow this morning on your LinkedIn, so I'm encouraged to follow your journey going forward.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for having me, Pat.